good news and bad news. The good news is I have a camera that I thought didn't work, but works. And the bad news is I've got a camera that I used to think worked, but doesn't work. Right, let's start with the bad news. This, guys, is the Yashica Electro 35 FC. If you watch my Olympus 35 RC video, or you've read it on my website, then you know what I'm talking about. Basically, when I was looking for that one film camera to end them all, this was one of the ones that I shortlisted. It's beautiful. It's a Yashica, so obviously it's got the Yashica lens. It's the perfect size. It's a little bit bigger than the RC. It's about the size of an Olympus 35 RD. So if I just reach for the RC, so if you just look at these, a little bit bigger, but they're sort of the same form factor, sort of the same sort of chrome and black finish that is typical with these cameras. But the thing with this camera is its aperture priority. So, you know, you change the aperture the normal way. It's a rangefinder, so you get the patch for focusing. It's such a beautiful camera, and the only thing I didn't like about this camera is the fact that it doesn't show you what the shutter speed is. Rather, it tells you if it's too low or too high. So it's usable. It's like the 35 GTN. That does exactly the same thing. It doesn't actually tell you what the shutter speed it's selecting. It just tells you whether or not you're over or underexposed. Now, from experience with the Yashica GTN, the exposure meter was working perfectly. Another great thing is the battery that this thing uses is the one that is quite readily available. I believe it's a CR2. I might be wrong, but it's one of those ones that you can just buy in a supermarket. So they're not the Mercury ones that are, you know, out of date. So I was really excited about this camera. Man. Until I put the battery in finally and discovered that the light meter is dead. And if the light meter is dead, for an automatic camera, there's aperture priority, the camera is dead. I've got to do a little bit more research about this camera. I think it might have a default speed. Usually it's a 60th of a second when the battery is dead. So you can kind of work with that, but you really need the light meter to be working for this camera to really be at its best. But it's such a shame because the light patch is, the rangefinder patch is so perfectly bright, and everything else is perfect. It's almost in mint condition as well, the body. So I might send it off to be repaired, or I might decide that that's too expensive to do since I have so many other cameras. So to be continued what to do with this camera. Now, for the little bit of good news, this camera. Now, I thought this camera didn't work, right? It is the beautiful, magnificent Olympus OM2N. It's one of the best cameras ever made. Simple. I was so excited when I first got this camera until I started testing the shutter speed, and lo and behold, half a second and 1,000th of a second sounded exactly the same. So I was like, oh man, the shutter speed mechanism is broken. It does take a battery as well. I put the battery in. I could see the light meter was working in the viewfinder, but I just didn't know. I just assumed, well, maybe the shutter speed mechanism was broken. Until one day I was reading more about it, and I realized that it was my fault. You see, there's this bit here. Basically, I had that switched to auto. So basically what that was doing is, regardless of what the shutter speed I selected, it was picking it by itself. So of course, it doesn't matter if it's 1,000th of a second or half a second. If the lighting is the same in the room, it's going to pick the same shutter speed. So the next thing, I switched it to manual mode and I tested it, and this thing works perfectly. So I'm so pleased. The only bit I'm not actually happy about is it's got the record data back to on it, and what that does is it helps put information on the film, so you can set the date and the time. Sort of one of those early days of imprinting your date and time with the film. I don't really fancy that. I think it ruins the photo. But obviously you can switch it off. You don't have to actually use it. But unfortunately, it's got this cable that connects to the sync socket here, and that's always kind of in the way when I'm shooting, so that's annoying. So obviously I'm going to be looking to replace the back. I could probably get one cheap off the internet and just swap it myself. It doesn't look like a very complicated thing to do. If I can't do it, I get someone else that can. But this camera, you and I, we're going to do a few things together. So that's it for today. I'll see you in the next video. Man, I've forgotten how to do this. It's been so long.